Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Son of God movie right here, my Armor of God t-shirt on, and before we get to who we're talking about today, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. This will be my last series of videos for 2023, as it is Christmas this week, and so wherever you are, whatever you're doing, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Today, we are going to finish the debunk of SciManDan. I call him ScamManDan because he doesn't really know that much about science. This is his video entitled Creationist Thinks Charles Darwin was an Idiot. He is trying to attack Matt Powell. Matt Powell is kind of talking about Charles Darwin's life. He's kind of talking about some of the stuff that Charles Darwin believed. And Dan's not doing a very good job of attempting to, do anything. When we last left off, Dan was talking about if Matt Powell was going to try to, attack, Charles Darwin, then he had to do something that would bring down Darwin's work. Okay, or that he would bring down, something like that. No one in the history of creation science, outside of maybe a few fringe positions, have ever disputed speciation or natural selection. But again, natural selection only selects. Okay, it only selects with what it has in the genome. And we've never ever seen that mutate into something completely different. Okay? We've seen slight variations within the kinds, but we've never actually seen something like, say, a dog become a cat, or become a rat, or become anything else. Even though they've gotten close with, chihuahuas and stuff like that. I'm saying that as a joke, by the way. The point being that if Dan wants to sit here and try to make it seem like creationists don't understand science, then he has to display some sort of science. When Charles Darwin says something, the burden of proof then falls onto Dan to prove that that wasn't taken out of a context somewhere. As we discussed in the last episode, the problem comes in when you have, Darwin saying that men are superior to women. And then he goes, well, that was in response to sexual selection. Yeah, because women control access to sex. So, by Charles Darwin standing there saying, aha, men are superior to women in regards to sexual selection, Charles Darwin was just being ignorant about the actual roles. And as I stated, the problem comes in when, you look at birds, right? Birds, the male is the most beautiful of the species, and they do the mating dance to attract a female, okay? And then the female comes to them. You never, ever, ever see a female doing something to attract a male mate. It's always the male doing something to attract a female mate. But we're the opposite, okay? Women will be the ones that usually dress up, put on the makeup, put on the bright clothing to kind of show. And this was even something I saw in a show back in the 90s, I think it was, on, I believe it was TLC at the time. This was back before TLC became whatever it was today. Back when TLC was TLC, the Learning Channel, they had a thing by a British gentleman named Desmond Morris, and he was talking about evolution and various things, but he was talking about something called the human animal, and in one of his things, he kind of broke down how kind of courtship and relationships work from an evolutionary point of view. And even he was usually when the women are ovulating or when they're wanting to have sex, they will usually dress up, they'll put rouge on, they'll put lipstick on, they'll go out, they'll do things. And there's been some videos on YouTube that you can search for. Like one of them that I saw was like these people came in. They looked normal, okay? Like they brought them in, they were in normal clothes, normal everything. And they were asked to secretly like write down what they thought the people were. Like okay, females rate the males 1 to 10, males rate the females 1 to 10. Then they had them all go away in the separate dressing rooms, and one for the males, one for the females. And then they had them take off their clothes, and they basically put them in like nude body stockings. Okay, so basically they were just like a tan buff colored body stocking, and then they put their hair up in like a hairnet type thing. Okay, like so basically when they walked back in, the only thing they had to go on was body shape, okay, and facial features. They had the women take off all their makeup, everything, okay, and then they walked back in, and then they had them re-rate. And the funniest thing is that in the short time that the men got to know the women and the women got to know the men, their ratings wildly changed depending on what they thought of the individual females' personalities, maybe a little bit about their body type. But like what they thought about them when they were wearing like when the females were wearing their makeup and wearing their clothes was radically different than what they thought of them when they were just wearing the buff colored or nude colored body stocking. Okay, it was a complete 180 in most cases. Like they would rate them like an 8 or a 9 with all of their clothes and their makeup and everything. And then later on, they were kind of like, oh my gosh, she's like a total 2 or she's like a total 3. And it was kind of funny to look at because what Desmond Morris talked about, what most people look for in a potential mate and a potential person, doesn't necessarily hold true all of the time because we're individuals. We're not animals in the strictest sense of the word. Are we part of the animal kingdom? Yes, but we're not total monkeys. Monkeys strictly look at certain physical characteristics in a mate, and then they go to that mate and they mate with them. That's it. That's all they do. But that's not what we do. Because we can speak to each other. We can talk to each other. We can do things with each other. And so that opens up a whole new dynamic that you can't say that one sex is superior to the other where that is concerned. There's so many variables that's why Matt Powell is like, yeah, Charles Darwin actually said this, and he's kind of an idiot for saying that because that's not how men and women work. Okay? So let's jump back into this. Let's get back in and let's try to finish this video today. We only have about 4 minutes and 25 seconds and about a minute left. He's probably going to start going. So this isn't going to take very long.
But once again, Matt has taken a quote out of context here. The full quote is, "But I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything." Clearly, Darwin was just having a...
Okay, so let's back this up just a little bit here. Okay, so he says, "But I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. One lives only to make blunders. I am going to write a little book for Murray on orchids, and today I hate them worse than everything, so farewell, and in a sweet frame of mind I am, ever yours, Charles Darwin." So, yeah. But what's the actual letter saying? Is this just... What was he actually writing about? You see, he's only publishing like a couple sentences, and now he's going to try to explain it away as, oh, Charles Darwin was just in a poor frame of mind. Okay, but how often was he that way? Was this the only letter? Because obviously the quote that Matt Powell put up on the screen was different. It didn't say, I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. In fact, the quote was, let me back this up just a tiny bit. It says, I am very stupid and I hate everybody and everything. The Correspondence of Charles Darwin, Volume 9, 1861. So is this the same letter or is it a different letter? Because obviously this quote, okay, says, I am very stupid and I hate everybody and everything. The one that SciManDan puts up says, but I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. So which is it? Is this the right letter, or did he write this in multiple letters? Because it almost sounds like Charles Darwin was in that state of mind for a while, not just one letter. And see, this is something that, if you want to talk about cherry picking, if you want to talk about someone coming at another person and quote mining, then it's up to you to show where Charles Darwin said this. If this is the only letter he said it in, then that's fine. Maybe he was just having a bad day. But if he did this in multiple letters, then he clearly had a very poor frame of mind most of the time. Okay? And maybe that came from the fact that when he wrote his book, he started to doubt why people were on the earth in the first place. Because if what you believe is that everything came from a puddle of goo, and that everything was evolved, and that everything is just slime, and there's no purpose to life, why do you need to like anyone? So again, Dan isn't doing his job here because he's just popping up one little quote and then saying, You know, if somebody mentions that, you know, let's say they say something about Jesus in the Bible, right? Okay? I'm going to go and I'm going to find every instance where Jesus talked about that, and I'm going to put it in context. And I'm going to say, okay, when Jesus was talking about that, he was talking about this. He was talking about this. In this book, he's talking to these people when he says this. Because a lot of times when atheists take things out of context, when we put it in context, we find that it doesn't actually mean what they think it means. Was this Charles Darwin having a bad day? Or did he say it over and over and over and over again, and Dan is only putting this quote up on the screen so that he can say, oh, he was just having a bad day. Wink, wink, nod, nod. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that Charles Darwin never had bad days, or that, you know, he was a perfect human being or anything like that. Okay? He was not. He was far from perfect. But, and he probably did have bad days, but it's how many bad days did he have, and how many times did he say this? Okay? And it's easy to pick something and say, aha, see, it was only said once, and he was just having a bad day. But did he say it multiple times? Because if he did, then he was in a worse frame of mind than what you think. Okay? So, yeah, let's continue on.
Stupid and hate everybody and everything. Clearly, Darwin was just having a bad day when he wrote that. We've all been there, haven't we?
So, Bill, Darwin was a big collector. He came up with evolution by natural selection. Could you give us like a 3-minute exposition of Darwin's theory of evolution?
The thing that is fascinating is Charles Darwin wrote this book where he has the theory and the experiments.
So, here's the thing. This is why I'm laughing. Everybody props this guy up as being the end-all, be-all of, like, science. And why? Because some actual scientists wrote some scripts for Disney They handed it over to a guy that had a little bit of charisma on camera, and he just regurgitated said scripts for kids. Literally. Okay? And now he's like the biggest guy that everyone goes to every time they want to talk about something. Yet, this is the same guy that did a TV show for Netflix that failed, by the way, called Bill Nye Saves the World, where he started talking about gender spectrums and all this other garbage, even though his own scripts, and Disney went in and clipped out the one part that actually talked about genes and chromosomes and XX and XY, and they still go to him, and they're like, oh, look at this, it's Bill Nye, the science guy. The only science training that this man ever had was mechanical engineering, okay? Which is pretty much the same training that I got. The only difference is that I went to a technical college, which was more hands-on, and he went to a 4-year university in Seattle, University of Washington, okay? And that's it. That's the only difference, okay? And no offense to Bill Nye, okay? He's pretty good when it comes to science, but he's not an expert, okay? Because again, his scripts were written by other people and were handed to him, and then he just had to memorize the lines and then go out on the stage and act certain ways and do certain things and tell certain jokes and do stuff. That was all he did. Okay? I mean, that would be like having someone on Chicago Fire, okay, or maybe Chicago Med, suddenly thinking that they're a world-class doctor or neurosurgeon. They're not. Okay? The only reason that he gets called is because he's famous. That's it. That's the only reason he gets called.
Looking at his collections and reaching amazing conclusions.
What amazing conclusions? What amazing conclusions did he reach with his collections? Okay, he collected bugs, and he looked at finches. Okay? On the Galapagos Islands. That's it. That's all Darwin did. Okay? So what was so amazing about this? Because he noticed different beak shapes on these finches. Oh my God. Everything came from nothing. Everything evolved from a single-celled organism. What? How? This is the thing that no one can explain, especially him. No one can explain this. Okay? Not even Dan is going to be able to explain it. Because they don't know themselves. They postulate how something may have occurred. But that's a far cry from actually knowing exactly what the process is and how it works and having a fundamental scientific law. And this is what most people have a problem with. Okay? They cannot tell the difference between theory and a law. Let me show you. Gravity. It's a law. Okay? That's a law. Evolution is a theory. An unproven, unprovable theory. Because by their own admission, what has to happen for things to evolve? What do you have to have? What's the magic ingredient? Time. Right? You have to have time. And they'll tell you to no end, because I've had people say, well, there's not been enough time. There's never been enough time. We haven't had enough time. Okay, then how do you know that's how it happened before? Because when you're looking at a bone in the dirt, how do you know that that bone, that dead animal, had any offspring? You can't know that. In fact, in all likelihood, it probably died before it had any kids. So how do you know that that thing is evolving into anything? How do you know that it evolved from anything? You don't. That's the point. That's what they keep missing. And Darwin looking at a bunch of beaks on finches and then going, wow, these finches must have evolved from something long, long ago and far away. Dude, it's a finch. Some finches flew out from the mainland to the Galapagos Islands and discovered some things, and as they diverged into the different islands, their beaks grew into different shapes. They're still a finch. They haven't changed anything. All the genetic information to make the beak is still there. It just made the beak shorter and fatter or longer and thinner depending on what it needed. That's called adaptation. And that's not macroevolution, people. That is just adaptation. Sorry to say. Guess what? We've seen that in the human race. Yeah. Depending on where we live, okay? Some of us have lighter skin, others have darker skin, because it's an adaptation. Okay? Some people can walk out into almost sub-freezing temperatures in boxer shorts, okay, and walk 10 miles through the snow and not get hypothermia and not die. But if you took somebody from like Hawaii and tried to do that, they'd die in a matter of minutes. Why? Because they're not used to it. They haven't adapted to that. Their body is used to warmer weather. But if you take the person from the Arctic and you take them down to the tropics, they'll get heat stroke like that. But a person that's lived there for their whole life, and their families lived there their whole life and everything, they've adapted to that. So it takes their body longer for them to do that. Okay? In fact, hell, Frank Herbert himself, okay, used a little bit of that human adaptation and put it into his book Dune. Okay? The Fremen, they evolved, or they didn't evolve, but they adapted to live on Dune. Not only did they build those garments, but they have a thing where it's like in one of the scenes, early on when they get to Arrakis, it's in book 1, okay? The Shadout Mapes comes to Jessica, and she hands, and Jessica's like, I know you come prepared, for violence with a weapon in your bodice. And the person, the Shadout Mapes is like, yeah, the weapon was meant for you, my lady. And so what happens is that she pulls out the crysknife, and she hands it to Jessica, and she pulls it out of the sheath. And you have to, according to the thing, this is the only thing that Denis Villeneuve's Dune got right, that the other two versions of Dune never did, was that you cannot resheath a knife without bloodying it first. And we saw that where when all of the guys had their knives out, all the Fremen had their knives out when Jessica and Paul were cornered in the desert, right? And they took their knives and then they cut themselves and then they sheathed them. Okay? Because they have to have a little bit of blood on them before you sheathe them, otherwise they'll dissolve. Okay, that was the way that Frank wrote the crysknife. So here's the deal, okay? So the Shadout Mapes finally gives it to Jessica, and then she starts to resheath the knife, and she goes, Mapes, you sheathe that knife without blooding it first. And the Shadout Mapes is like, oh my god! And she's like, she pulls open her bodice, and she goes, take my water. Take the water of my life. And she's like, okay, so she takes the thing and she kind of gives a little bit of a scratch on a Shadout Mapes, and it the blood starts to come out and then it just dries like that. And what does she say? She goes, is that some kind of like an adaptation to the dry climate here, like ultra fast coagulation? Because like if they were to be cut, then like if they've gotten cuts or scratches or anything like that, they could bleed to death, right? If they're not careful on a planet with no water, right? They have to be very careful about that stuff. And so that's an adaptation. That is a thing about adaptation that Frank Herbert put into his book. Okay? So that's the point, folks. Is that you are looking at someone, Darwin, who does not understand that adaptation doesn't mean that everything came about through some kind of selective process. I mean, it's just stupid to think that. Because the more you start to understand the process, the more you start to realize they really don't know how the process works. And what's funny to me is that every single time I've said this, I've had evolutionists and atheists tell me, that's not how evolution works. And then I say, okay, then how does it work? How do you go from one kind of animal to another kind of animal? Like, for instance, how do you get from a cow to a whale? Okay? And almost every single time I've asked that, no one has given me a good answer. And when I've said, because at some point you have to have a half cow, half whale that can't swim, can't walk, and it's worthless either on land or in the sea. And they're like, that's not how evolution works. Then how does it work? Punctuated equilibrium? Where, like, a cow just gave birth to a whale? How? We've never seen that in the history of ever. Have we seen that? And the thing is, what most people really don't understand is that bacteria divide many, 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 many times a day. So, in the amount of times that we've had to observe bacteria in the last 100 years or so, okay, through microscopes, through laboratory tests, through all these different things, don't you think that they would have evolved into something different by now? They're still bacteria. And guess what? They're always going to be bacteria. They're not going to change. Okay? But somehow, some people found some colonies of bacteria. Okay? Called stromatolites. And they thought, oh my god, see, here's a whole bunch of stromatolites, and these must be some kind of early multicellular organism. It's like a beehive. It's just a bunch of bacteria that got together for survival. That's it. Bacteria don't necessarily need to, but those bacteria decided to. Who knows why? We're not bacteria. But that's not a multicellular organism because it's not working together. It's not every single cell performing a function to make something up. Because I can guarantee you that the cells that are on your arm aren't doing the same cells that are in your muscles. Aren't doing the same thing as the cells that are inside, with the muscles. Okay? The cells that make up your eyes aren't doing the job as the same cells that are in your nose or in your brain. That's not what those stromatolites are doing. The stromatolites are just getting together for survival. That's how they survived. Okay? And that's it. It's not a multicellular creature. It's not one organism. It is a colony of bacteria. Okay? They didn't all suddenly fashion one brain and a pair of eyes and some ears and start walking around or swimming around. It's just a colony of bacteria. Yet, in the twisted mind of some of these PhDs out there, again, see the Nat Geo special, The Story of Earth, somehow, and as if by magic, those became multicellular organisms after an extinction level event that leveled everything, but didn't kill everything, because we don't know why, but it did. somehow and as if by magic. It is absolutely asinine not to see that that is an even bigger fairy tale than this. Because at least we have writings from ancient Greeks that tell us about these guys, and that's about the only thing that it does. But, I mean, at least we have, some people that talk about these gods in these ancient Greek writings that say, hey, there were these people that had extraordinary abilities, and they went and did extraordinary things, and we think it's because of these gods that they were able to do this stuff. Okay? Like, they had these myths about people, and a lot of times myths are based in some kind of reality of people who do extraordinary things. Okay? We've seen that happen. Like, we have modern day myths. Okay? Case in point, and some of these people are, kind of based on real life actual heroes. In fact, probably one of the most famous ones, okay, is this guy. He's a Marine. We have Marines. We know Marines are badasses, okay? It's one of the reasons why I love this character so much. He's a badass. And he can hold his own in a lot of different scenarios against guys that are far superior to him. Generally speaking, they don't want to actually hurt him, okay? They're trying to incapacitate. He's not necessarily trying to be caught, okay? He's just fighting for his life. But he's a normal human being in a world filled with people that have abilities far beyond his. And yet he is one of the most beloved and one of the most badass superheroes, okay? But it's a myth based on real life, real people, the Marines, okay? That's the point. But it's funny to me that, that people come up with these fairy tales and say it's actually real, it's science! Exclamation point trademarked. It's not.
He said, I am very stupid, and I hate everybody.
I'm a biologist, and Darwin has been an inspiration to me throughout my whole career.
While secular humanists would have us believe that Darwin was a genius, in reality he was a misogynist, a racist. He hated women, he hated marriage, he hated work.
Well, he hated marriage because he married a cousin of his, okay? Which was actually a proscription in the Bible that you were not supposed to marry, like, your first cousin. You're not supposed to marry until you get to, like, third cousin. And we're all, like, 14th or 15th cousins anyway, just by our genetic code. But you have to get at least 3 away from family relations to make it so that the genetic code is different enough that if you do procreate, it doesn't create a whole lot of problems. Because our genetic code has flaws in it. Okay? That's why he hated marriage. Is because he married a first cousin and because he wanted a pure family. Okay? And, like, his kids were born deformed and really mentally retarded. Okay? It was bad. That's probably why he hated marriage.
He was afraid he was living in Fantasyland, and he admitted to hating everybody and everything. That's the truth.
When he was ill, having a bad day.
So, Dan thinks that every ill in Darwin's life that he ever said was because he was having a bad day. How many bad days did he have, Dan? Because it's not like he said this once. Okay? He said it over and over and over and over and over again. Just go read, like, his books. I mean, honestly, he was probably the worst, and he's the worst scientist. You know, it's so funny to me that when somebody like Ron Wyatt goes out, says, hey, I think I've discovered some stuff over here, okay? I think I've discovered a site over here, something like that. And he ends up going back and getting some people, and they come back out and they do some things. People will go, he's not a scientist. He doesn't know anything. Darwin wasn't a scientist, yet everyone, including Dan here, love to, like, jump on the Darwin bandwagon. Oh, he was this amazing scientist. He wasn't a scientist. You guys are so hypocritical, it hurts. It's pathetic.
And yeah, he hated marriage, but he got married at 30 and was married for his whole life.
He said, often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I have devoted myself to a fantasy. And so Darwin was afraid that everything he believed was based on a fantasy.
And the quote mining continues. And this quote was from a letter Darwin wrote to his friend and mentor, geologist Charles Lyell. Now in this...
Oh, yeah, because Charles Lyell is another one who was a great scientist! Exclamation point trademarked. Charles Lyell was a lawyer. And a virulent atheist who hated the Bible. And he created something called geology. Which basically meant he walked around England looking at layers in the dirt and saying, oh, I'm going to call this layer this, and it's going to be this many thousands of years old. And then I'm going to call this layer this, and this is going to be X many tens of thousands of years old. And I'm going to call this layer this, and it's X many hundreds of thousands of years old. You flippin' kidding me, dude? And people are like, oh, science. Look, I'm not going to say that all of geology is bunk, because there's some good things that it can do. Okay? The study of earthquakes, the study of volcanoes, the study of plate movements, that's all good stuff. But the geologic column that Charles Lyell attempted to create in his mind? Not real, son. And again, he wasn't a scientist, he was a flippin' lawyer. Are you kidding me?
This letter, he was thanking Lyell for his amendment to Lyell's new book on geology, and a particular section about species, bringing it more in line with Darwin's work. And Matt's not even got the quote right properly either. It is supposed to read, I may not have devoted my life to a fantasy.
And you'll notice that he didn't put that on the screen. I wonder why not. Probably because Matt Powell actually did have the quote right, and he's taking it out of context and rearranging it a little bit to try to make it seem like he's not saying I've devoted myself to a fantasy. You see how disingenuous they are? This is the idiocy. This is just stupid, in my opinion. Because in one context, you're going to put a quote on the screen and then go, oh, he was having a bad day. And then you're going to turn around and say, oh yeah, he was writing to another guy who, was talking about geology and who created the field of geology, who wasn't even a scientist himself. And yet, he didn't even get the quote right. And then he doesn't even put the quote on the screen. I wonder why. Probably because it would destroy the entire thing. Probably because that's actually what Darwin said. Because Darwin said a lot of different things. Okay? And then, goes off on tangents about said stupid thing. Like he says on Origin of the Species, he says, I freely confess that it seems kind of stupid that the eye should have evolved, and yet he goes on for 4 pages talking about how it could have happened. Without any scientific evidence, without any knowledge about the eyeballs or what they could possibly do, or anything like that, he just goes on this whole entire rant for 4 pages. Why? It's absolutely asinine to think that people like Dan know anything about what science actually is. Science is what you can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. And if you go outside of those 4 things, you're outside of the realm of science. And you have now entered the realm of science! Exclamation point, trademarked. And that's where these atheists live.
Dear, oh dear.
Now, this just shows us that he didn't actually believe in scientific law, because if he did, he wouldn't be afraid that he was living in Fantasyland. People can come up with their own opinions about Darwin, and they can continue to claim that he's a wonderful man and a scientific genius.
You don't have to be both. You can be one or the other.
But in reality, Darwin hated life. He hated you and I. He hated Jesus. And that's why he spoke out against Christianity.
And there is the real reason that he's making his video.
Is he wrong? Is Matt Powell wrong? By Darwin turning his back, I mean, Darwin was trained as a preacher. Okay? He was trained in Bible college. He was trained to believe this book. Is that what happened? Isn't that what happened, Dan? Didn't Darwin turn his back to give you your theory? Huh? So tell me, where's he wrong? You have to be some kind of moron not to understand that. Seriously. Where's Matt Powell wrong? You haven't proven anything Matt Powell has said has been wrong. In fact, if anything, by omission, by not putting things on the screen, by not backing up some of your arguments, you've actually proven that probably Matt Powell is more right than you are.
Trying to discredit Darwin because his theory flies in the face of his beliefs.
Yes, it does fly in the face of our beliefs. Okay? It flew in the face of his own beliefs. Because he read a book by a virulent atheist named Charles Lyell, who basically attacked the Bible and said that the earth was not 6,000 years old, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years old. And Charles Darwin swallowed that hook, line, and sinker. So tell me, where's Matt Powell wrong? And still to this day, you guys don't have any proof that the earth is millions of years old or billions of years old or anything. You have a theory that's been disproven and has been shown to be a hoax on numerous occasions. You have holes in your theory the size of Texas that you can't answer. So tell me, where's Matt Powell wrong?
The sad truth about Darwin is that he actually was supposed to be a man of God. His dad always wanted him to be a preacher and somebody that would spread the truth of God's word to the public.
He was atheistic regarding the Christian God, yes, but I don't think he ever truly discounted some sort of supernatural being.
And how does that make him atheistic? If anything, that would make him more agnostic than anything. Okay? But by turning his faith, by turning his back on his faith, Okay? Matt Powell is absolutely correct. He became an atheist. And if he believed that some sort of supernatural power was using evolution to further the human race and to further people, he's an even bigger idiot than I took him for. Because that's not a god you would want to worship.
But Darwin got involved with the wrong crowd of people. And he got involved with the wrong ideologies, and he let Satan take over his life.
He did.
And that's when everything took a turn for the worst in his existence.
Satan took over his life.
Yes. Satan. Clearly taught by Jesus in the Bible. Clearly taught in the Old Testament in the Bible. I'm sorry. Were you expecting something else, Dan? The book of Ezekiel, the book of Job, Jesus talked about him in all four Gospels. Okay, was even tempted by Satan in 2 of the Gospels. Was talked about by Paul. Was talked about by Peter. Was talked about by John in his Revelation. I'm sorry, cover to cover? Somebody here really doesn't know the Bible.
Seems a bit drastic, doesn't it? I think what we can deduce from this video that Matt's produced is that he is trying to discredit Darwin personally.
No, he's trying to point out that Darwin was a man. Okay? A man who was deceived into believing a lie. Like Dan, Darwin believed in the lie of evolution. Okay? Because he was allowed to believe in something that wasn't real. That was created by somebody who hated God, who hated the Bible, who hated Christianity, who hated everything about religion, named Charles Lyell. And so Charles Lyell went out and wrote a book and made up some facts, and Darwin swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. So yeah, he was a fallible human being, like Dan, like me, like you. Okay? He was a fallible human being. And if you're following said fallible human being, don't be surprised when you fall flat on your face. Okay? Because it absolutely doesn't mean anything. Darwin believed a lie. And many, many people, like Dan, okay, since Darwin's book came out in 1859, have swallowed that lie. Where do you think that comes from? John chapter 8, starting in verse 41b. Then they said to him, "We were not born of fornication. We have one Father, God." Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God, nor have I come from myself, but he who sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to listen to my word. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and a father of it. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears God's word. Therefore, you do not hear, because you are not of God." That was Jesus speaking to the Pharisees. What is Satan again? Oh, that's right, the father of lies. Okay? And Jesus, John 14:6, from his own mouth, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is truth. Think about it, folks.
And I think he's doing that not because he believes that Darwin's character was questionable, but because his work and his book threaten Matt's beliefs.
Not necessarily. In fact, as I said in the first part, many modern secular scientists discount a lot of what Darwin said because he was wrong in a lot of aspects about his book. So we don't necessarily need to disprove, quote-unquote, Darwin's book, because his works have already been debunked through just the scientific method. Because a lot of what he said was completely out of the realm of science because of A, he was not a scientist, and B, he had no knowledge of what he was talking about. He was just pontificating on old theories that other people had that he learned about by reading Charles Lyell's book and probably some other people's books at the same time. Okay? Because yes, in 1830 he sailed on the Beagle, and then in 1859 his book On the Origin of Species was published. It is likely that he went out and read some other books on the subject to kind of read about this whole thing called evolution. Okay? Because he was trying to understand what he was looking at when he saw the different beaks. Evolution was not new when Darwin wrote his book. He just popularized it. Okay? But he was not a scientist. Again, he was not a scientist. Okay? He was not trained in science. He didn't have any knowledge of science. But people like Dan, just like Bill Nye the Science Guy, they prop him up on a pedestal and, oh, look at him, he's so awesome, he's so great. And then when we say, yeah, he was a racist, a misogynist, he hated everybody, he just had bad days. Every day of his life? Really? How many bad days did he have? You can't explain away every single behavior someone has by just saying they had a bad day. I mean, why do we have prisons for murders? Oh, the guy just had a bad day. He had to go out and kill someone. That's not an excuse, son. In fact, that's probably the worst excuse I've ever heard in my life.
Especially the belief that Earth is only 6,000 years old.
And there we have it. Okay? Then the burden of proof is on you to prove that it isn't 6,000 years old. Does he provide any proof? Well, we only have a minute and 11 seconds left in this video. I don't think he's going to provide any proof. Okay? If you're going to make the claim, you have to back it up, son. I have a book, a time-tested historical document that says that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. And I have historical evidence that shows that that's likely because we have king lists, and from the Danes and Norwegians going back to Noah, we have, and sometimes all the way back to Adam, we have some records from China, historical records from China that show that they have genealogy records going back to Noah. We have various other historical documents that show that this is true. So where's your proof, buddy? If you had some, you probably would have shared it.
On the Origin of Species totally contradicts that, and in a very eloquent and definitive manner.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. In fact, it doesn't even prove that evolution actually happened. It's just pontificating on whether or not it could have happened. Again, it's a theory. It's not a fact. But you'll see how Dan here, without providing any proof, is making these claims as if they were true. But again, you can just Google how scientific is On the Origin of Species, and you'll get back a not very. Okay? Because a lot of what Darwin said in his book, by modern science's own thing, and this is another thing that you can find out about. Okay? Again, I've said this many, many times. Just go watch this movie. Okay? Expelled, no intelligence allowed. Okay? And in that, Ben Stein goes to various places and he asks people, hey, what about this? What about this? And in one place, he's in a laboratory where they're doing research on the cell. Okay? And they actually show some animations of just what goes on inside of a cell. And he goes, if Darwin thought that the cell, because back then you could only view the cell very simply. He goes, if Darwin thought the cell was a Buick, about the complexity of a Buick, what is the cell now? How do we know what the cell looks like? And their answer is more complex than a space shuttle. Okay, the space shuttle, the thing that we sent many astronauts up, that was probably one of the most complex machines ever built by man. And one cell in your body is more complex than that. And somehow it arose, somehow and as if by magic? Come on. Okay? I'm sorry. Darwin is not the arbiter. He is not the end-all, be-all of what evolution is. Again, he just popularized the theory. But it's just that. It's a theory.
Well, there we go. A very interesting...
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call it here because, honestly, no offense to Dan, he didn't really do anything to back up a lot of the statements that he made. In fact, I would go so far as to say, out of the 2 episodes that I've done of his, and out of the multiple times that I have debunked some of his other stuff of what he said, this is probably the time when I have seen him produce the least amount of evidence ever. Ever. And, that is saying something. So smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think about this series, and I will see you in 2024. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.